I always found it really, really hard to limit myself because I'm a strong believer of the power of divergent thinking and bringing ideas from different disciplines and strengths and societal domains together in order to create something new. The repetition is kind of important. So I see such a big difference if it's just like a one-off experience or if it's a repetition. And I want to put the people in the seat of being the co-director, so to say. I think that entrepreneurship and your solopreneur journey, it's actually the best personal development course that you can put yourself through.
What you just heard is a glimpse into a conversation that sits at the intersection of creativity, identity, and solopreneurship. In this episode, Magdalena Kim Novak and I talk about the tension between creativity and conventional career paths, why safe spaces actually matter for innovation, and how tools like storytelling, visualization, and even AI can help individuals and teams imagine and move toward the future version of themselves. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil. My next guest is an entrepreneurial artist who traded high-stakes advertising pitches for immersive work that helps people step into the future version of themselves, blending storytelling, emotion, and a little bit of magic. Magdalena, welcome to the show.
So good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation. Now, I want to take you back to the beginning, if you like, right? A little bit. You mentioned that back in high school, you dreamed of being a successful artist, but your parents, a doctor and a realtor, basically mirrored back that the idea that art wasn't a viable path. So you ended up taking what you called a compromise track to bridge those two worlds, right? So looking back, was that actually the right call or the beginning of a very long negotiation you're still having with yourself?
It's so interesting because I consider myself a multi-passionate, really. And I've been trained in piano playing, in singing, in drawing since I was a little child. So actually, my parents were helping me go along that creative path. But then when I was 17, 18 years old in high school, I figured out all of the career talks we had at school were about becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, becoming a businessman or woman. I don't know if they even made the distinction back then. And I figured it's just really, really hard to connect those two sides of me because I do come from a background where having a certain kind of lifestyle and being able to freely move and travel is quite important to me. So instead of just studying art, I decided to find a course of study that would combine those two worlds. And I studied culture and communication management in Germany and Sweden, and then did my master's degree in Copenhagen in a management track, but with a focus on the creative industries. And yeah, when I left my university time, I figured, so where are the areas where I can really express myself? Because I also always cared a lot about storytelling, speaking, voice, just really making myself heard. And yeah, I entered the tech startup world in Austria, but was traveling internationally, pitching a startup where I was the only woman um, on different stages in the world. It was really interesting, but suddenly I found myself um, in a very money-driven field where my own creativity was basically constricted to getting creative with talking on a stage.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. It's funny how you're sort of generationally though. There's this idea of sort of tangible professions, right? Where you're sort of put into these tracks. Where I remember when there's a famous Egyptian comedian who used to say, and I'm from India, and it's sort of similar. As his mother once told him, "You're either a doctor, engineer, lawyer, or a failure." So it was it was like art is always considered this sort of difficult track to be on, right?
Yeah, and I think it's so funny, especially nowadays. I mean, now it's around 20 years later. where we are considering creativity as that base ingredient for innovation. And
Yeah.
I think especially trained artists now with AI tools at their hands are becoming more and more important also in the, let's say, classical business world.
Yeah, and creativity, that's the funny thing to me, right? Because every profession, I think, benefits from creativity. And it's funny when you just said your parents sort of encouraged that part of you growing up with piano lessons, drawing, all this stuff. And then it was not a viable profession. So it's just one of those weird dichotomies, I think, that seems to happen. And yet I know every profession, we always talk about sort of creativity being a superpower, right? Even in the boring world of business, right? Where it's like the more creative you are in terms of a vision, the way you can, innovate. It's always been fascinating to me how, it's a requisite for everything, but yet it's not sufficient as a track by itself.
I mean, I find it interesting with every project that I'm doing now. Of course, the day-to-day work and the operational tasks also take place. But
Yeah.
the flame, the vision, the creative vision out there is a very different driver when you're kind of creating from inside out. And I think that's the switch that has happened in my life, maybe around 2 years ago. I then went from the tech startup field into more like digital agency work. And then I was with one of the biggest creative agencies here in Austria, but mostly in business development, in pitching, in communications, which I do love. But it's only a minor part of myself. And yeah, around 1.5 years ago, I decided to just really go after that vision, knowing that I'm able to realize visions for clients as an employee in the past and also my own visions. So last year I decided to go to New York and do my degree in experience design, do a speaker's training here in Austria. So I was back and forth from New York and Vienna and just really go after my own vision of how I, with my approach to multisensory and immersive experience design, can really bring further transformation in people and organizations.
Yeah. So before we get to New York, and I want to come back and talk about that a little more detail. So I want to go back to the part when you were traveling to pitch with these tech startups, right? Now you were surrounded by what you described to me as dev guys. So tell me a little bit about what did that environment feel like for you at the time, and what did it start to show you about what was missing in those spaces?
That's such an interesting question. And I think at the very core of what really takes me to working in transformation. So I think one of the most human needs is to be loved and to belong and feel
Yeah.
safe. And as we know, the startup field is all about risk and risk taking. And I know like my personality is pretty extrovert. I am a risk taker, but also I want to belong, and everybody does. This is something that we're sharing. And when you're usually the only woman in a tech startup organization, like the company, and then you're bringing that kind of idea that all of these males actually created out in the world, and you're functioning as a messenger, and then you're finding yourself in spaces where you again, and I mean, I'm talking about the year 2017, 18, this is a while ago, but where then again, I would find myself in the minority in a way, and still, of course, have to keep my head up high and just uh, be this messenger pitch girl that is not showcasing any kind of vulnerability in a culture that is very much driven by speed, by performance, by not letting yourself digest. I found it interesting. Like recently, I was at an event where we learned a lot about networking and how it makes so much sense to, when you first enter an event space, to enter the room and make yourself very familiar with everything that you find in the room and also the people there in order to feel safe first, and then digest all of those interesting conversations that you're about to have on the way. And I found it so brilliant because that was something that I did not do back then. So it's just, I think I was chronically overwhelmed. I'm a very creative person, but also highly sensitive. And I think this combination can be quite a big strength when you know how to use it to your advantage, but you need to be safe and you be in a culture of people and also a spatial environment that lets you be safe in order to then um, get out there and create from within, basically, and show what you got and share it with the world.
Yeah, that's interesting because, it's funny with brands, we always talk about the fact that the greatest brands understand that people are tribal, right? Innately. And they attract sort of like minded people. Like, you have Apple, for example, is sort of about creativity and intuitiveness. So each brand sort of has these traits and you attract people around it. And in startup culture, you're right. It's sort of always been sort of a bro culture, right? It's not really been, it's been innately tribal, but it's sort of been very closed off, right? It's not really been open to, sort of that masculine energy is really what's driven the startup world and the hustle and the bro culture. So there really hasn't been space for anything else.
I mean, I think we're at a very big shift right now. Um,
Yeah.
I can see that so many women in my circle of acquaintances, they're just creating their own apps, they're creating their own websites. It takes them sometimes just like 3 hours because they already have a very clear vision. And I just think that this kind of barrier to the startup world and also to becoming an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, or maybe somebody who's even starting to lead a team after a while, I think it's getting so much more approachable, um, as there are so many AI tools at our fingertips that can really enable us to maybe bring our storytelling strengths into something tangible. Also on the internet, I mean, I'm a big fan of live experiences as a trained experience designer, of course, but I know how important it is to be out there and to connect with people who who really want to connect with you. So that kind of matching, I think it has to happen. Um, yeah, in a very well designed way. And yeah, I think it's a good shift that I'm experiencing these days.
Yeah, and you're right because I think that's the fundamental thing and that's why I say people are very fearful of the time we live in now because of AI and people are fearful. I mean, yes, I just read this weekend alone there was a Molotov cocktail thrown at Sam Altman's house, and then two people went and started firing at his house last night with guns. Right, so I mean, there's a lot of fear out there in terms of the what AI may or may not do, and of course, nobody really knows the answer. But the flip side of it is, like you said, it's also a great leveler, right? It's allowed people to do things. You don't have to sit around and wait to join a startup. You can be sitting in, I don't know, in a living room in Bombay or in Vienna, and you can actually start a company with just the tools that we have available. I mean, with AI agents and all the other things that we have access to now, you don't have to have a formal organization or be part of anything to be able to start something from your living room. So I do think there is the other side of it too, right? Which is giving access to people and bringing ideas to the world doesn't require massive infrastructure, overhead, or tools, or even skills that you needed before. Like I mean, I've built, custom GPTs and stuff, and I have zero coding experience.
Oh, that's amazing. I really love this spirit of just doing it and learning on the way and yeah,
Yeah.
showing what you're doing.
So let's talk about now. You quit in 2024, and then you mentioned you sort of immediately threw yourself into three very different educations, right? A speaker program, body and movement work, and experience design in New York. Now, from the outside, that can look like somebody who's completely lost or somebody who's very clear. Which was it? Which was it for you?
Um, I mean, to me, it's all connected. So to me,
Yeah.
um, speaking using my voice, and I'm meaning this in a very general way. If I'm writing, if I'm scripting something, if I'm actually talking into a microphone, this is one big building block of what I care about and how I identify as me. And then movement, dancing, Pilates, yoga. I did this training in an approach called mindful body, which is really about, combining a very aesthetic, musical, curated approach with nervous system regulation, but bringing a very aesthetic element to it that you would rather have in maybe contemporary dance. Um, so this is, I think it's really important for me to also in my work now, and I can now in 2026 connect the dots so well. Like, I want to move people with my work. And quite metaphorically, I was doing this movement training also last year. So I work with my voice, I work with movement quite literally sometimes. And sometimes it's rather metaphorically, where I'm just finding out where people want to go. Like, who do they want to become? Where does the team want to go? What is their future vision? And how can I help them with multi-sensory, creative, and empathetic experiences to actually tangibly go there? Because I think sometimes it's so much about talking and writing, and people tend to forget all of the other opportunities that we have in our sensing body to actually grasp and sense into change. And the third degree was in experience design, which is basically kind of the frame of everything that I do. So how can we design experiences for people in order for them to feel and behave a certain way? And how can we leverage tools from theater, immersive theater? How can we leverage tools from individual psychology or social psychology into something that ultimately feels to people that are attending it like they're becoming the main character in a very, very big set? And this is, to me, very much connected, because when you're drawing the comparison, let's say, with a movie, like how a movie is directed and a film set, I mean, you do need this sound, and you do need this script, and you do need all of the visuals, the set design, and then you need the actors um, on stage or at set. And basically what I'm doing is I'm turning my participants of the experiences that I'm doing individually or also in organizational context into those main characters. So I sometimes like to compare my work with one of a movie or theater director.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we'll dig into that a little more, the recipes of your work. But you're right. Experience is multisensory, right? We don't sort of think about that all the time, because a lot of the time we're sort of sitting in front of a computer or even for a movie, and we're experiencing it, in a, I guess it's not quite one dimension, but almost like a one dimension way, right? Whereas if you think about, just walking down the street, it's a multisensory experience, right? In terms of everything that's happening around you. So I love that idea. Now, one of the things I want to touch on is you mentioned something interesting in our pre-call, because you said when you say experience design in New York, people get it. In Austria, not so much, right? So when you hit that blank stare, what's hardest to translate? Is the gap your wording or something deeper, you think?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the wording, of course, is a bit of a barrier. So people in Austria would rather think that when I'm referring to experience design, I'm referring to UX UI design. But I mean, that's usually very easy to clean or like to clear up. Um, I mean, I think culturally, there's also a quite of a different mindset. So what I really appreciate whenever I'm in New York is it's just so easy to start conversations with people wherever I am. So I think being active in a certain type of event, venue, activity that you're doing, and just easily interacting with other people, I think that's I mean, I think that's very much in the US American culture, especially like in New York. In Austria, people maybe are a little bit more to themselves. So everything that involves having an interactive moment in something that I do, it needs an even safer environment and an even safer dramaturgical and narrative frame for people to actually be open to step into that. And I learned so much in the past years, or probably even before, about how to create those safe spaces. And one experience that I did was really quite spiritual, actually. So I thought, okay, this is a space where people are usually quite familiar already with what it means to give consent, what it means to actually step into a certain environment. And I thought that even in business context, when you're doing, let's say, a training on how a newly formed team can arrive at their desired outcome. I think this whole topic of creating a safe space and also working with consent is so important. And I think there's still so much work to be done to bring concepts that sometimes are deemed a little bit non-traditional because they're coming from more like the mindfulness bubble or more like the wellness or health bubble into more traditional business context.
Yeah, no, you raise a really interesting point, right? Because you're right. It is a safe space is more than just sort of like, it's gotten a bad rep, I think, because of because of what it's associated with. But a safe space really is a space where you feel comfortable being yourself, right? So even in a business environment, we talk about cultures where people are able to speak their mind. Like, you want to have those types of spaces, right? And it's really interesting because, as you're talking about it right now, I'm thinking I've actually put on music and danced down the street in New York. Now, I don't know if I did that in Vienna, what people might think, right? But it, and it's so funny that you're right, because you think of different cities. Now I'm thinking in my head, like, I probably wouldn't do that in
You would
London.
probably be famous in 2 days.
Okay, so I'll probably have a TikTok meme or something. Yeah, but in I don't even think twice about it in New York, because it's like, nobody even bothers to look, because it's so normal in New York to see random things, So, and it's very funny though, your environment really sort of, allows you to be a certain way or not. So I think that's a really interesting point that you just raised.
Yeah, and I mean, Vienna does have a wonderful history of
Mhm.
creatives. I mean, especially like around 100 years ago, Vienna was 1 million inhabitants bigger. Right now, we have around 2 million inhabitants. Back then, it was like 3 millions. And it was kind of a really important city when it came to creative work with architects, with philosophy, with psychology. So there's so much there that sometimes needs to be activated, I think. So I believe that sometimes people really need a specially curated frame in order for them to give themselves permission and allow
Permission.
themselves to share what they want to contribute to something. If it's a conversation, if it's a team meeting, whatever. So I think designing for that kind of permission, designing for that kind of allowance, is crucially important for really innovation to take place.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And now, so the other thing which is interesting to me is you called yourself a multi-passionate generalist. So in a world that loves neat boxes, does having so many layers feel like a superpower, or does it ever blur people's understanding of what you actually do? Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, right now I've come to the conclusion that it actually works as a great filter. So, so people who expect me to only answer in one sentence, it would probably filter them out because I cannot do that quite well. I mean, I can try, but of course, it has been quite hard for me when I've been growing up with having so many different interests and also going after them and dancing and music and drawing and acting, like all of that I considered so vital for myself, for my own identity, and showing up like that with those kind of nice little things in my backpack in the world. And when I entered the workforce after university, I realized, okay, you have to really limit yourself in order to fit into the role description that you should do. And
Yeah.
I always found it really, really hard to limit myself because I'm a strong believer of the power of divergent thinking and bringing ideas from different disciplines and strengths and societal domains together in order to create something new. And if you're limiting yourself, or if you're only introducing yourself and saying like, okay, I'm this visual artist, I do digital animations and immersive projections. Well, yeah, that could be interesting, but it's just like a very minor part of what I do. And I think finding the right people that also appreciate that and that maybe they know it from themselves and from their personal life I think it really opens up a completely new way of connecting with other people as well. Like, suddenly it's not this small Vienna coffee table, but suddenly it's this like huge open kitchen where you can turn everywhere and you try from very different dishes. And yeah, I'm a big foodie, so I love that.
Yeah, no, no, I love that. And you're right. And I think everyone has it in them, right? Because like you just mentioned a minute ago, like I don't know any kid who doesn't have a wild imagination, right? One day they want to be an astronaut, the next day they want to be a writer, the next day they want to be, whatever it may be, a doctor. And there's no limit to that imagination. And yet, when we sort of go into the education track, like you were saying a minute ago, we sort of have to get into this neat little box, right? And we're told like you got to bring it in and you got to focus on one thing, and that's it. You've got one lane and you got to stick to that. And yet that's not how we're designed, right? So I think I do think we're starting to see some shift now where we're sort of encouraging people to sort of open more tracks. Because to me, education should almost be the opposite now that I think about it, right? It should be opening your mind and helping you sort of be wild, and you can still have focus, but sort of bringing all those different things into that area. I think the way you describe it, I think, is what we're missing right now, right? Because otherwise we create, it's the famous Ken Robinson TED talk. I don't know if you ever saw that, about this girl who was loved to dance, and the teachers kept telling her sit still. Like they kept thinking that she'd get up in class and want to, and she was just, she was a dancer, she was creative, and to them she was fidgeting and not being disciplined in class. So it's almost that you know thing that I think of that education does, is it beats the creativity out of us in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, when you just mentioned that TED talk, I think it also reminds me of the whole topic of how is neurodivergence treated in organizations.
Yeah.
And I was part as an employee of a couple of diversity trainings. I mean, it's quite common also in Austria, but it would never touch that topic. And I'm talking about trainings that took place 2 or 3 years ago. And I know, like, especially when you have that urge to move, that could be kind of a hint pointing to you being that neurodivergent, which of course you need the diagnosis and all of that. But I just think it's very interesting, like how there's so many different ways of behaving and being creative in this world, and how some of them are just not really included yet in certain environments.
Yeah, and especially the corporate world, right? Because you're sort of like, and even the whole business attire sort of was designed to sort of neatly turn you into one sort of. Everyone looks the same, right? With the tie and the suit, or the pantsuit, or whatever you want to, the women's attire. So I think, yeah, it was like, but again, we're starting to see things change, which I think is for the better. So the other thing you just mentioned was, you're an entrepreneurial artist, but companies often hire you for events and HR, right? So what do they think they're getting? And at what moment in the room do you see them realize that something deeper or different is happening?
So usually there's these two use cases where people would hire me. One of them is, okay, we're doing an event, but we want to make it extraordinary. So that would
Yeah.
be coming usually from the event or marketing directors. And I'm glad to help there and then really turn the event into an actual experience. And the other use case is that individuals or groups of people, they want to transition into something, into a future situation, a future scenario. Um, and I'm helping them with my work to make that future scenario tangible. And so right now, I had a client who was a former executive at a bank here in Austria. She herself is in the process of entering stages as a keynote speaker, consulting people on their organizational development specifically. And I really helped her visualize where she wants to go. And also, like, I was lucky enough that she really trusted me with a lot of data that she has accumulated beforehand about her personality, about previous projects that she did. So I had a lot of data personally in in-depth interviews, but also staples of data from her previous work and her journey in as a coachee as well. And then I created this narrative identity video for her, an audiovisual experience. She even agreed that I could clone her voice. This is just, for her. So she's not publishing it. It's just something that has has a certain value to her. And then she texted me and I just sent her the first recordings. And she texted me like, she couldn't sleep. And she woke up at 5 a.m. and she was actually super nervous for a pitch that she would have the other night. And it gave her so much self-confidence and it calmed her down. And now she even thinks about, starting a podcast. Like we just kind of had this as kind of an audiovisual contract, so to say, this video that is now our working document from which on we're creating all of the behavioral steps. And I mean, of course, I was very touched when she told me, that, it just really gave her the self-confidence and the ease to push through on that day. And in general, do it with more self-confidence, with more ease, because she already could feel herself, see herself doing exactly that in that video and knowing, okay, I'm fine. I'm not dying when I'm entering the stage. So that's what I love about narrative identity theory. If you're working with that kind of future identity, your nervous system is already accustomed to it. And you can make it work. And I think especially people today, sometimes growing up with like so much content and social media, it's hard for them to visualize themselves in their desired future scenarios. And it's even harder for them to write it down, to maybe draw it. And that's where I come in. And then when people are like, oh my God, but you felt me. I'm like, no, I did not feel you. I just listened very closely.
Right.
And I just, used a lot of empathy, but also data to create something for you that you obviously really want to do in order to realize your potential. That's the most beautiful thing to me, helping people to realize their potential, because I know how much it takes you to a good place and takes you forward from my own experience as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what I love about it is you sort of brought it back to what you were talking about earlier, right? Is that permission. And it's amazing, as adults, we don't give ourselves permission. I almost feel like we give ourselves less and less permission, if that makes sense, as we get older, because we sort of become more set in our ways. We sort of, societal expectations weigh on us, and we start becoming the people we think we need to be rather the people we want to be, right? And so I absolutely love that, because and there is now you probably know this, but there's science behind the fact that if you can start to visualize who you want to be, then it's more likely to happen than if you don't, right? Because your brain starts seeing connections, it starts seeing patterns, and the moment you give yourself permission to be that, then you start realizing that future, and it goes beyond just an image or a picture to becoming a reality. So I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting when neurosciences suggests that for such a long time already. But this kind of findings have not been incorporated into the business or corporate world as they could have been. I mean, I know that there's this couple of manifestation apps and all of that, and I think it's great, but I think it's a pity sometimes that it seems sometimes you have to decide, am I in the B2C field and am I serving individuals that are, looking for transformation, mindfulness, and so on? Or are we making use of this research and of the potential that we can do with it on a very big scale, actually? So
Yeah.
I'm getting really great feedback these days, also from teams that are together creating a vision. Like, this is, if you're working multisensorially, audiovisually at least, and then also like maybe with your body moving somewhere as you're maybe experiencing the video in an immersive installation. So that's kind of my three favorite pieces in the cooking recipe, so to say. So if you're doing that together, it creates such a strong team identity. And I think when you're also collaboratively um, having an impact on this whole creation process, then you can already feel this self-efficacy as a person in a group, or also like in a one-on-one with me. And it's just, it's just so beautiful to see these people becoming the creators of their future and just really
Yeah.
enabling them to do that.
It must be like watching kids, right? Unleash their imagination, like suddenly seeing these adults tap back
Yeah,
into their
in a way.
childhood. Yeah, yeah, I love that. And also, I love the way because, I mean, vision boards, for example, are something people always advocate, right? But you're doing it in a way that's completely multisensorial, involves movement, sound, like everything. So, I can see the power of it. And, interestingly, I just was thinking, I'm a big golf fanatic, so I was watching the Masters this weekend. But athletes, they always close their eyes for a second before they do anything, right? All they're doing is visualizing the outcome that they want. So, yeah, no, I think there's a lot to it, and I think the business world would do well to learn from, uh, to adopt these techniques.
No, absolutely. I just really love the example with the with sports. And I do like to add to that that I think the repetition is kind of important. So I see such a big difference if it's just like a one-off experience or if it's a repetition and you're also sometimes you're finding out something new about yourself or your goals or your vision and then you're adapting it. But I want to put the people in the seat of being the co-director, so to say, and then of course they're leading their life as the main character, as the director. But the repetition, I think, and this is something that I know that people in sports do a lot, visualizing again and again and again and again. This helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, true. And you're right. You're sort of building a muscle then, right? You make it a habit rather than, like you said, a one off. So, the other thing I want to touch on, you talked about the architecture you're building, right? There's the startup, the book, the podcast, the consulting. So,
Mhm.
tell me a little bit which feels the hardest to articulate and how do you make sure it still feels like one coherent story?
I mean, ultimately, it's all something that is telling a certain story that is close and dear to my heart about
Yeah.
transformation and potential realization. So that's kind of the connecting layer. I find it so interesting. So when I'm working as a consultant, when I'm working in one-on-ones, but also with groups of people, it's a very different kind of work than when I'm sitting down and I'm writing my book. But
Right.
I think it's so beautiful because I mean, I have both of those sides in me. I like tending a little bit or leaning a little bit more towards extrovert than introvert, but I also need time to integrate and be by myself. And of course, when I'm writing and I'm creatively writing, I'm also integrating my own experiences. So I do need both kind of outlets, and I feel that the topic itself, how to create transformational experiences and how people realize their potential, I think this is a topic that actually allows for these different kind of, let's say, formats or maybe even revenue streams. So to me, it's kind of natural in a way to follow all of them. I mean, of course, the branding, because we were briefly touching upon branding, the branding is kind of a challenge
Yeah.
because I think the tech startup I'm working on right now, which is kind of a software as a service spin off from the future identity simulator I mentioned, it it requires a very different branding approach in the field than, for example, when I'm working more artistically. And it's more about my own brand, and like the work also speaks a bit for itself. Um, I created this brand called Kimano Experiences, which is kind of coming from my name, Magdalena Kim Novak, like playing a little bit with the capitals. So and basically that means Kim, it means gold in Korean, and mano in Italian means hand, basically. So I'd like to just, um, give it this kind of handmade, I'm going as I'm building attitude, or I'm learning as I'm going attitude. But I think it kind of holds it all together. But yeah, I mean, I think especially when you're creating an architecture around the services and the products that you provide and the brands that tie it together, it's ultimately it's also about experience design and storytelling. And yeah, and it's about having a constant dialogue with people and also finding out what works and what does not work. I know that um, what I've been doing has been working quite well when I was in New York. I have to maybe adapt the story, the narrative, the experience, how to experience me and my brand and my services a little bit for Austria. It's just like it's just a constant A/B testing and trial and error. So, I mean, there are a couple of things that I really appreciated to learn in the startup context. And I think that's primarily a courageous testing mindset.
Yeah, and that's honestly how you have to sort of figure it out, right? You have to,
Yeah.
until you put things out there, you don't really figure out what's working, what's not, right? You just have to sort of listen and not be, too too fixated on having a particular outcome, right? Which I think you'll get there. And the other thing I love that you talked about was sort of like, it's almost like we need, like, I'm an introvert, right? But I can be an extrovert when I need to be, right? So I can sort of call up that side for smaller periods of time. And I think we all have that. And I love how you sort of described you need both sides, right? To be able to sort of bring the whole together. I never thought of it that way, but I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I'm writing a book now too, yeah, you're right, because that's sort of me and my thoughts. Whereas, the podcast obviously is a very different experience for me. For some,
What are you writing about?
I'm basically giving away my entire methodology in the book. So that's the goal. Yeah. Of the brand boost methodology that I built.
I
So to
can't
help
wait
people
to
build
read
their
it.
brands. Yeah. Well, me too. We'll get
But
there.
touching upon the topic, like introvert, extrovert, it made me think about that. I read this term called ambivert, where you
Okay.
kind of switching, and then it
Yeah.
made me think about ambidexterity. And I was wondering, are you writing your book with your right hand or your left hand, or are you just typing it? Like, how does the process go like for you? Because I
Well,
find
I'm
it's
right.
interesting. Sometimes I really want to write with the hand as well.
Yeah, true. I haven't written with. I do write with my hand, but I'm not. My book I'm writing on the. I'm using AI as my co-author right now because speed is more important to me than ownership. So that the methodology is mine, but it's helping me bring
Yeah.
it to life, right? So yeah, no, I actually learned typing in school. So I type with both hands, like the old-fashioned way. Probably one of the few people left in the world who can use
Very
both hands to
good.
type.
It's almost like piano playing. You know,
Yeah.
I'm coming from piano, and my dad is also um he's he's a ambidextrous, so he uses both of his hands. And I always find it so fascinating, also as a concept. Also in the business world, when you're thinking about usually organizations are faced so much with they need to exploit all of their assets that they have, like employees and their IP and so on, and then they need to explore. So usually people talk about this kind of ambidextrous organizations that need to do things that are seemingly opposing at the same time and create a culture that is fit for that. And I think it's just such a good container, like this concept of ambidexterity, because people also they can just look at their hands and be like, yes, I can pull myself in two different directions. I don't know, I need a strong core, basically, and a good connection to be able to stretch that.
Yeah, and actually, in fact, that's one of the things that I think is starting to happen is that the business world is realizing it doesn't have to be an or, right? It
Yeah,
can be an and. And I think the creative field realized this a long time ago because I took an improv class, which is one of the favorite things I ever did, was the yes and concept, right? Which you're probably familiar with. So I think
absolutely.
we sort of, we would do better to sort of bring that in, that everything doesn't have to be it's either or, right? You can be introvert and extrovert, right? Depending on the situation and when you need to be. So the other thing I want to touch on is the recipe behind your experiences, right? You mentioned they're sort of similar, whether you're working with an individual or a corporate team. So if we were to look under the hood of your process, what are three non-negotiable ingredients, if you like, that have to be in the room for this emotional shift to happen?
I would say it's interactivity. So I'm not standing in front and performing something. I want to include the participants. it's immersion to a certain kind of degree. I mean, I really love to work visually with projection mapping. I think it helps so much with world building, and it just creates environments that you can tweak in any kind of direction. And we know that if you're entering a forest like if you're entering a room where a forest is projected and on all the four walls, your brain kind of processes it similarly than when you're in the actual forest, which I think is a very, very powerful thing. And we're so visual creatures that this level of immersion, like this kind of visual immersion, is something that I absolutely love. But I could, see it in a more general sense. So you could also design an experience that is immersive by kind of using the data, for example, or the experiences that people were having and including it in the actual experience. So it could be psychologically immersive as well. So yeah, interactive, immersive, and yeah, probably multisensorily. And like when I started my work as an experience designer, I always wanted to bring in all of the senses at the same time. Like I
Right.
wanted to create something like you're hearing that thing and you're smelling that thing and you're seeing that thing and you're moving it. Like it's a lot pretty much. I mean, you can use that if you want to create a certain kind of peak or a certain bang in experience. But yeah, I know that it's just like a toolkit. Like you have to be very aware what it creates. So of course, when you're closing your eyes and you're just experiencing a certain type of sound and that is very, very low volume and just you really need to focus on it, it creates something completely different. And when you're entering a world and you're kind of invited to move, or you're with your emotions, you're creating a change in the visuals that are then immersively projected. So I just have to, be very mindful about which sense I'm speaking to at which time. But yeah, I'd say interactive, immersive, multisensory.
And I suspect there must be a balancing act, right? Because, like you were saying, because you can also overwhelm people, right,
Yeah,
to the point where they shut down. So you
yeah.
have to sort of make sure that you're helping them sort of experience each thing at the right level versus throwing everything at them.
Yeah, I mean, I usually start my work apart from, understanding the goal of the customers and maybe seeing like where the challenges are at individually or in team setting. I like to work with experience diagrams and really designing for the dramatic arc. So
Right.
this is something that is at the very beginning of my work. And also, I do leave a little bit of openness for improvisation. Usually, I don't want to create a very, very strict experiential frame. Of course, there's these puzzle pieces. You could even think of it as stages or scenes, but it's a frame ultimately, because the moment that you make it more interactive, there's always these unforeseen circumstances. And I think those are beautiful. And this mix of creating a frame that still lets people act in the moment and behave authentically, I think that's where the magic lies in experience design.
Yeah, true. Not sort of forcing the journey, but letting it
Yeah.
play out, right? And then interesting things happen when they're unexpected. And I imagine for people too, right? They do things that completely surprise them about themselves, right? Which is the beauty of it. So the experiment you're working on right now with future identity, right? Through narrative, AI, video that you just talked about with this client. Where did that idea first come from?
That's a funny story. I mentioned that around 1.5 years ago, I kind of changed my careers. I went into my sabbatical, did my educations and so on. And it was 2 months after I quit my job at a creative agency. And I think it was like 2 days before New Year's Eve. And I had scheduled like a nice little date with my cousin, Carla Marie, and invited her to my place. And I was like, okay, let's do a list of things that we want to let go of, that we want to release, and things we want to keep for the next year. I mean, probably know like how you can do that. And you're burning the paper with the things that you want to let go of and so on. But I had just discovered how to use Midjourney in AI generated image design. And and I designed, like, based on our conversation and on the things that we wrote down on the list, I designed 2 pictures for her and me with generative AI. And on my picture, we then projected it. I mean, you can see I'm here in the Altbau, in the kind of old-fashioned apartment style here in Vienna. We projected the image onto the doors, and we would just walk into the image.
Wow.
Um, and I remember, like, I designed my own picture in a way that I would facilitate an light installation, immersive experience in a beautiful space, having people around me and so on. And that's exactly what happened 11 months later in New York. And her experience was something along the lines with her boyfriend, and them opening, or like leading a restaurant together and living in Vienna together. That also happened. So it was just really beautiful to, take that very nice cousin experience and just see how it actually unfolded. And then I realized that, why should this not work for business life? And why should this only be a practice that, 3 girlfriends are coming together and doing it with on New Year's Eve? So, like, this is more powerful, and we know what it does to the brain, and we know that how important this clear identity that you have from yourself is, of course, also in business life. And this is creating your financial freedom, and this is creating space for you to actually be authentic with everything that you do. So that's how it started.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so funny, right? Because so many of these things that we have spoken to, 74 people now, it's not always sitting on a whiteboard trying to sketch out like your next big business plan, right? It's something in life that sort of sparks a moment. It's something you sort of realize, and then you realize you can connect the dots and turn it into something, a passion into a business. So I love that. And actually, that brings me to the question I was going to ask you, which is, a lot of solopreneurs with creative artistic backgrounds struggle to put a commercial value on their work, right? So, and you may have answered this now already, but what's the internal shift that finally made that click for you to connect those dots to say, I can do this, I can turn this into a business and do it commercially?
I mean, to be really honest, I still find it hard sometimes
Yeah.
to be very strict about my boundaries, especially when I'm consulting people one on one. But what really keeps me going is that I know that I'm creating value, and I'm creating a lasting mindset shift for people. And I really started to take the focus away from myself in that regard, and focus on, how can I help them, and how can only maybe I help them, because I'm combining a set of things that would be perfect to solve their challenge. And then, of course, whenever I'm receiving amazing feedback from one of my clients or participants, I just really try to save it somewhere. It feels like this kind of, it's kind of king's or queen's coat that I'm wearing. So I'm just also trying to uplift myself with the beautiful values that I have created in the past. And I think this shift from, like, Magdalena, it's nice that you're doing something that you like, but you're providing a value to somebody.
Right.
Um, that helped me the most.
Yeah, it's hard, especially early on, right? And you're doing something that is so new. You're sort of having to educate as well as get people to sort of open up and be willing to experience it. But I think, again, I think you're onto something, and I think it's a great path to be on. So,
Thank you.
kudos to you. So, if we were to grab coffee 3 years from now, what do you want to have achieved? What's different? What have you built? Where are you?
Well, 3 years from now, I see myself in a very specific space. It's a vision of mine called House of Transformation. So I will have this actual space focused a lot on immersive projections that gives people a way to creatively and playfully explore their inner transformation topics in unity, in community. Yeah, I mean, last week I visited the space and just checked out some real estate. Yeah, I think in 3 years we're going to do the interview from there. We're going to do the podcast from there. And I'm inviting you to Vienna to do it in person, hopefully. Yeah. And yeah, the new Vigia, that's the name of the future identity simulation of my tech startup. It's in wide usage for individuals, but also as a puzzle piece in learning and development journeys for corporates, as a software as a service tool. I'm speaking, I'm moving, I'm creating. This will be the same. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, definitely I'll plan a trip there and I can dance my way into the place
He's
and then
always,
we'll see.
always invited to Vienna. Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So, if you could offer one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
Focus on personal development first. And I'm not saying this in a way that, oh my God, and you have to optimize every single aspect of your life, but rather like be kind to you and just really see where those belief sentences are maybe hindering you from actually going where you want to go. I mean, I think that entrepreneurship and your solopreneur journey, it's actually the best personal development course that you can put yourself through. Because I mean, we just discussed this whole topic of monetizing and how hard it is, especially coming from a artistic or creative background, to put a price tag to something. So I think self-value and creating value, those are very tightly connected. And it's also no shame if you're figuring out like, "Ooh, I might have some problems with my self-value." I mean, you can always change things. You can always do that, and you do not need to do it alone. You can do it in community. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And you're right. This journey has been the most sort of self awareness awakening that I've ever been on, right? More than any textbook.
Here's to that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered?
Well, I mean, right now I'm really curious to also learn more about the needs from different cultures when it comes to their future identity exploration. I'm very happy to work with customers worldwide for Novigia, for my future identity simulation startup. And I'm glad to receive feedback and just to keep a conversation going on creating your future identity, on transformation. I'm curious to see what people really feel their kind of recipe for success is to transform into a direction that they find really desirable from inside out and not from outside in, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
yeah, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I think it's so great to also connect Vienna to New York to India. Like it's just, it's just creating this very open space.
Yeah, no, I love it. I hope it sparks lots of conversation because I definitely think this is the area you're working on now is going to be a big space in many ways, especially in the corporate world, but even beyond that. So, well, that brings us to our rapid fire round. I'm just going to throw five fun questions at you, and we'll see what we get. So, if Kimano experiences had a vibe or a feeling, not a description, but a feeling, what would it be?
you're you're taking some wet sand and you're letting it drop into the ocean and you see where it goes. It's kind of this feeling of flow.
Hmm,
Yeah.
I love that. If you could design an immersive experience for any historical figure, who would it be?
Einstein. And
That
I
would
would
be.
love to know about quantum physics and how we could include that in an experience.
I definitely want to watch that experience. So tell us about the last experience, not something you designed, but something you had that genuinely moved you.
Yeah, that was yesterday. I attended an intimate living room concert of a live LP recording. And you would get the LP just after you left the concert. It was just like 30 people in the audience. Amazing band called Schiefer here from Austria. And I sat in front of the singer, and like the last song, I lost it all. Very cathartic. I had to cry and met amazing people. So it was very intimate. Yeah.
Wow. All right. If you could step into your own future identity simulation 5 years from now, what's the first thing future Magdalena would say to you today?
Slow down. Slow down. You're gonna build something lasting. It doesn't matter if it's happening in May 2026 or in October 2026. Enjoy your life. And also live a little.
Wise words from future Magdalena. So, you're a voice artist. What's a word in German that has no English translation but perfectly describes what you do?
Okay, there's two words coming up. They're more on the funny side of what I do. So one of it is Spompanadeln, which I think has a Jewish origin, if I'm not mistaken. So Spompanadeln, it would rather be like doing something like mischievous or something, but you're up for an adventure, but in a very sweet kind of way. So mach keine Spompanadeln. Don't do mischievous adventures. This is something that people would say. What was the other one that just popped up? No, I forgot it. No, I think Spompanadeln was good.
That's good. I love that. I just love the sound of it.
Spompanadeln.
Swampanado?
Yeah.
Perfect. It's very evocative. You don't even have to translate it. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. So, Magdalena, thank you. It's been so much fun having this conversation with you. And I look forward to that trip to Vienna to see your new space.
It would be awesome. I really enjoyed being here, and what a lovely and inspiring conversation we could have. Thank you.
There are a few ideas from this conversation that really stuck with me, especially if you're building a business on your own. The first one is about the pressure to simplify yourself too early and why that can actually work against you. Magdalena touched on something a lot of solopreneurs wrestle with. When you have multiple interests and skills, the instinct is to sand them down so you look easier to understand. I work with a lot of solopreneurs who've been told by brand gurus, by marketing advice, by the internet to niche down, simplify, pick one thing. And yes, eventually that matters, but too early, it can be a trap. At the beginning, your job isn't to prematurely narrow, it's to notice patterns. You need to put your skills into the market, test different angles, and pay attention to what people respond to. That connecting thread usually doesn't appear through introspection alone, it appears through evidence. So the question isn't, how do I make myself smaller or simpler? It's, what is the pattern that connects these strengths in a way the market actually values? Figure that out, and your varied background stops looking messy and starts looking differentiated. The second one is about permission. Magdalena talked about helping people visualize the future version of themselves, almost like rehearsing it before it happens. Her work with future identity videos shows that visualization isn't just woo, it's nervous system regulation. When you rehearse your future self, you remove some of the friction and fear of the unknown, making it easier to actually show up as that person when the moment arrives. Now, think about that as a solopreneur. Most of us operate in the opposite direction. Instead of rehearsing the future we want, we rehearse the doubts we already carry. Can I charge this much? Am I ready for that stage? Do I really belong in that room? And the reality is, if you don't give yourself permission to grow into the next version of your business, your brand will keep reflecting the old version of you. And so will your pricing, positioning, and self confidence. For solopreneurs, the real work of building a business often isn't tactical, it's identity work. The third thing is about safe spaces and why they matter more in business than most people realize. Safe space has become an overloaded phrase, but strip away the noise, and it's actually a really useful concept. What Magdalena is describing is something really fundamental. The environment you put people in directly affects what they're able to give you. She talked about how in Austria, even getting people to interact requires a more deliberately constructed frame than it would in New York. Here's why that matters for solopreneurs. Your client's experience either creates safety or resistance. So ask yourself, are you designing it in a way that makes it easy for people to open up, be honest, and actually do the work? Or are you rushing to get them to the deliverable? The brands and business owners who get the best outcomes and the strongest client results are the ones who create the container first. Whether that's in how you run a discovery call, how you onboard someone, or how you structure a working session, the environment you design shapes the quality of the outcome. And the last one is about monetizing work that comes from a creative place. Magdalena was honest. She still struggles with it sometimes, but she described the shift that changed things for her, and it's one worth paying attention to. She stopped asking, "What is my work worth?" and started asking, "What problem am I uniquely positioned to solve for this person?" That's the reframe. When you tie your price too closely to your identity, your personality, your passion, the fact that you love what you do, you'll almost always undersell because it starts to feel like you're charging for you. But when you anchor it to the outcome you create for a specific person with a specific challenge, the price stops being about you and starts being about the value of the change you create for them. So stop trying to price the deliverable and start pricing the shift. That's where your number starts to come into focus. My challenge to you this week is to do what Magdalena did on New Year's Eve, but apply it to your business. Write down the version of your business you want to be running 12 months from now. Not a goals list, a description. What does it feel like? Who are you working with? What are you charging? Then ask yourself, is my current brand story reflecting that version or an older one? Because that gap is the work. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If today's conversation made you realize your brand is still reflecting an older version of who you are, let's fix that. I'm offering a free brand clarity session. We'll look at your messaging live, find the friction, and you'll walk away with 2 specific pivots you can act on immediately. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind. And remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.